So that's, to boil it all down, in our opinion, what his drawback was, is that there's no bourgeoisie, according to Stalin, anymore under socialism. Now, how does this, I'm going to relate this to all this over here. I'm boiling all this down very simplistically. It's hard, but these three graphs over here are basically all the same thing. The idea of a U-curve is actually pretty important in the way we communists think. Just to take this one. Gandhi liberated India in 1947, or he was a leader in the movement. I don't know if you could say he liberated. Everybody knows he was a pacifist. He was for nonviolence. Did not organize armies to kill off the English to get them out. But India continued to suffer from starvation. And where it started out ahead of China in life expectancy when they were liberated, they fell behind. Why? Mao used violence. Used violence against the landlord classes, against the occupiers. And he installed collective agriculture. And now, after a few years, China isn't behind India anymore. Why? Because peasants aren't starving to death. That's the bottom line. Starving to death. To this day, in India and pretty much the rest of the subcontinent, millions of children are starving to death each year. And that adds up very quickly to more than war. This is something that I myself, was surprised to find out when I was studying the causes of violence and what I was going to do with my life. I thought, probably war was a good place to start, figure out what the causes of war are and why this evil comes about. Turns out, war doesn't add up nearly as quickly as starving peasants, if you want to count the dead bodies. Okay, so let me back up. These curves, I'm telling you, yeah, Mao used more violence. Okay, Gandhi hardly used any. He didn't use any. There was a rebellion within military units in India. But he's famous for this. But the landlord stayed in power. So he wasn't actively shooting people, but he was letting people starve. We would say that people have an ethical responsibility to each other. If people are starving to death, and that starvation is preventable, then that's no different than being shot to death. We count that as violence. That's how we look at it. A lot of people don't. Now let me get into that's exactly where we're going to start to separate from, the predominant point of view in the United States would be some kind of Christian idea, right? Well, the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill. Well, it's only 10 of 8. You might as well go home, because if you're a Christian, there's nothing I can say to you. If you're really hardcore, believe that thou shalt not kill is what God said, and if I don't do what God said, I'm going to hell, or if there's no hell, I should go to heaven at least by carrying this out. I can't argue. If you're right, you're right. Okay, there's nothing we Stalinists can say to you. If it's thou shalt not kill, there's no doubt Stalin was bad. He killed. Okay, so the question is, from our point of view as Marxists, we call it idealism. The afterlife idea, God, Christianity, that's idealism. Trotskyism is another kind of idealism for the most part. Why? Because they're not telling us about things that were actually possible in the real world. In fact, a real Christian will say, even if I could save someone, I will not kill someone. If I could save 2 people, if I could save 10 people, I will not kill someone because it's what? Thou shalt not kill, right? And when I put up graphs like this and start talking about the numbers of people who die, you're going to hear someone say, either thou shalt not kill, that's one of them. The other one you hear a lot is ends don't justify the means, right? Which is another way of saying don't calculate it out. You should have principles against violence. And therefore Stalin was bad because he was violent. Well, we're not going to deny Stalin was violent. So it really does come down to this question. Are you living in this world, and do you concern yourself with this world, or are you more concerned with your afterlife? Now, there are a lot of idealists who don't realize that they think the way Christians do. I would say most academics, in fact, think the way Christians do unconsciously. But unless you can show a choice that was less violent, and you can show us how it would have worked, we're not going to be persuaded. So we're not going to hear it when you say the ends don't justify the means. No, because we know that if Stalin hadn't slave-drived the Soviet Union the way he did, they would have lost. Because you just saw that map I handed around, okay? Hitler, even though Stalin, drove the Russian people into the ground, drove the Soviet peoples into the ground to make them industrialized, Hitler still almost won the war. Now let me tell you a few things. When they got to Stalingrad, the Germans held most of Stalingrad. When they came, they bombed it to smithereens, and the troops came in. The Russians held part of one hill on the river. Okay, you saw the river that's kind of separating European Soviet Union from the rest of Asia, which is very sparsely populated, right? The Russians held part of one hill and a pocket here and there. Most of Stalingrad was occupied by the Germans. The Germans they came very close to winning that battle. That's what I'm here to tell you, okay? And it's so obvious to people who know this history that even Gorbachev, who obviously hated Stalin, and was the great hero of the United States, even he, when he had a review done of this question, didn't believe that there was any option like what Buchanan was saying or other people were saying when it came to World War II. He did not even believe that because it was that close. If you had slowed down the pace, if you said, okay, let's go a more relaxed pace to industrialization, let's not kill off people who make mistakes, let's not kill off people who aren't, gung-ho enough, let's not kill off people who are sowing intellectual doubt. Trotsky being the #1 intellectual doubter who predicted that Stalin would lose World War II, he predicted this openly throughout the 30s. Let's not kill off those kind of people. This was not a choice that the Soviets had. They almost lost it. They gave up 27 million people and still just barely won that war. That's what you need to understand. So, returning to this question of the grass, why I did this. It's a question of reality. It's like if you go see the movie Matrix, you get to pick the red pill or the blue pill. Okay, taking the red pill is not pleasant. This is not pleasant at all if you go see this movie. But it's the truth. Okay, now I'm telling you that from our point of view, the truth involves mostly a description of how much violence and death there's going to be given certain paths. We're saying we can prove that there's more violence and death because of the road Gandhi took. We're saying there would have been more violence and death if Buchanan had his way. Buchanan did not want to force collectivized agriculture, although he admitted he was wrong later, but in the 20s, late 20s, early 30s, he did not want this to happen. Did not want so many people executed for getting confused and screwing up industrialization, or for being saboteurs. They were called wreckers, of which anti-communists from the United States did in fact witness. There's books published about this, people who were wrecking Soviet industry. Buchanan wanted a more laid-back approach. Not a lot more, but significantly more. And even Gorbachev felt, after reviewing the history, this was not an option. Buchanan was one of the major leaders in the Soviet Communist Party, and that was his plan. And the Central Committee rejected it. They picked Stalin. Trotsky's was another plan we can talk about. Probably some of you had something to say about that.